All right, so welcome everybody. Are you ready, Ben? Yeah. All right. Awesome. So welcome everybody. So today, what we'll be talking about is the project document template that I created for Sharp Games. The document's basically just kind of like a guideline when you're building a video game or any kind of project, really, but specifically video games in our case. It kind of helps you really map out everything that you need to be doing. So one of the things I like to discuss first, the first point obviously is an overview. So an overview, you really need to give a good general description of what your game is. Like it says in here, you want to list details, list facts about the product, important details, and other parts of the product that are critical. So this would be a good time to give like a general overview of like maybe of the style or the genre of the video game. So if it's like a shooter with a top-down view, or if it's an RPG with an old school style, or maybe you're going for like a 3D game, whatever the game is, make sure you write a good description in your overview. And then that will really lead us into the first part of the outline, which is your introduction to the project. So this is where you make your main points of the project. So describe your main points, meaning that's been broken down. So your main points are basically going to be like your objectives. And your main points would be like, what am I bringing to the table that's new? Um, you know, what am I trying to accomplish? Things like that. And then your objectives, of course, as well. So, what's your hey Matt? So, what's your overall objective? Of the game. Your game should have multiple objectives. If you're gonna create a video game, even simple Bejeweled type games should have multiple objectives. So even the simplest of games should have multiple objectives. You need at least one objective because there's no point in playing a game without an objective. The next thing when you're designing your video game, you want to define the style of the game. Now, if it's a new style of video game, or you at least you think that it's a new style of video game, be extra detailed in your description then if it's a completely new style that you're introducing to the world. Otherwise, nobody's going to understand it. You're not going to understand it. And when you go present this to people, they're not going to get it. And investors, especially, are not going to get it. And nobody's going to want to buy your product or even invest time and effort into your product. No matter how cool and amazing it is, take the time to be descriptive about the style of your game. It's a really simple thing to do. The next thing, I have design. Going back to the project introduction, though, you can define more than what's listed here in your project introduction. It doesn't have to be limited to just these categories. In fact, I would recommend that you expand upon this because, after all, this is just a general guideline. So the next section, though, is design. So one of the most critically important things about video games is your GUI, or your graphic user interface. Unless you're doing a text-based game, um, which I don't know of anybody who would do a text-based game. I think I've only seen a few, and they're not very popular. I think I've seen a few that might have been popular, but most games are going to have a GUI. So that's pretty much why it's in here. So you want to just think about your layout involving the style of, what do you want for your GUI? Like, does it need to be like metal? Is it going to be like wood? Are you going to have a lot of animations? What's going on, in your layout? Like, really think hardcore about what you want your game and what you want it to be, and how you want to express it. And it needs to be a layout that really flows well. So if it's a point-click game, and on the left hand side you have the movement, and then on the right hand side you have like the attacks, that's not going to work out really well. You kind of want everything to kind of flow together so where it's easy for the user or the player to use your product. It needs to really just have a good flow to it. So that comes into the style portion. of things. And then key items would be things like, are you going to have an inventory system? Well, if you are, where are you going to place that at? What's going to happen when you interact with other players? How is that going to work out, and affect your GUI? Like some old school RPGs, go to a new screen, where the character tells a story. And then other games just have it like over the character's head. And then other ones might just have like a little chat box where they put stuff in. Really, that's really up to you, however you want to do it. But I would consider that a key item. And what I would do with your key items, I would even further break that down and listing them. The next section talks about screens. So if you're doing an RPG, for example, you need to figure out how you want to design your storyboard screens, and the controls and the buttons and whatnot. So different screens might have a different layout. You may not always have the same layout. Who knows? That's totally up to you to decide how that's going to work, but it needs to be documented and it needs to be detailed, in your documentation and how you want it to work and how you want it to flow. A good reason for that is so when you take this to your artist or maybe somebody like Matt who designs games and levels, like your level designer, he'll be able to look at that and maybe give you some pointers, or she. They'll be able to look at that and kind of tell you, hey, this works, this doesn't work, this should be moved here, so on and so forth. So they can give you some really honest, critical feedback about your layout and your design of that particular screen. Next section I want to talk about, a lot of people overlook this, is your options, specifically for your game, like your game options. But it doesn't have to even be limited to your game options. It can be also like whatever, like if you have power ups and stuff like that too, in your game. But in this particular case, I would say just generically your game options. So like if you want to test sound, if you want to enable cheat codes, stuff like that, whatever you're featuring, describe that. I got a question. Oh, that's quad. I'm not sure what that was all about. Anyway, so describe your features in a nutshell. And in menus, moving on to the next section of menus, what controls are going to be in your menu? That's pretty important. How are you going to get to these options, or what are you going to have in your menu? Like, you're going to have start game, save game, stuff like that. Really outline that, what's going on in that piece. Next thing, your requirements. If you're doing like a 3D video game, obviously you're going to need to do some testing to determine what operating system or what platform you'll want to support. If you're doing mobile app, you'll want to determine if you're going to do Android, iOS, Windows Phone. Yeah, nobody does Windows Phone, but in the event that you want to do a Windows Phone app, you might want to determine that. Does anybody have any Windows Phone apps out? Like, seriously? Just curious, anyone?
Not that I know of.
I didn't think they were really out there. I mean, I think there are some, but not really supported heavily. So, anyway, operating system. If it's a desktop application, is it for PC? Is it for Mac? If it's from Windows, which operating systems does it support? Usually XP and up is usually a good wide range there. If it's Apple, you probably want to support like Panther or above for the older operating systems. Next is hardware. What are your requirements? Some graphics cards. You might have like really intense graphics if you're doing 3D models. So you need to find out what your limitations are. There's lots of testing tools out there for graphics to determine, your minimum and your max, to run your game, or what's recommended. But you need to know these things, or at least plan them out, what you generally want. So if you're doing something like a 2D game, you're probably not going to have intense graphics. So you could probably put down for a 2D game, you could probably put down like supports Windows XP and above. And then you could probably say for your recommended, probably Windows 7, just because it's 2D. Even that being said, though, you still might want to run some stress tests just to make sure that Windows XP will even be supported, because if you're using like DirectX libraries or something like that, it may require a newer version of DirectX that Windows XP no longer supports, or maybe Vista or whatever, that Microsoft's no longer supporting. Same thing goes for like Apple. I'm not sure on the Apple spectrum as far as like what their DirectX equivalent is, but I'm sure that they have one. And same for Android. Um, Android and iOS. You know, these are things to really keep in mind. Some phones, for example, may not support your hardware, so that would be a hardware limitation. So you want to make sure that you can support multiple phones if you're doing a mobile app. Next thing, schedule a start date. Define when you're actually going to start working on your project. Engrave that in stone, and then break that up into phases. Like we have phase 1 here. So create a realistic list of tasks for phase 1. So like generally my phase 1 is simply the planning process. I create a list of tasks based on, we're going to pump out a design. I'm going to work with the artist and level designer and the developers, and we're going to come up with a design for a game that works. Maybe phase 2 will actually be where you're actually doing some code, where you're actually building a GUI, and so on and so forth. Really plan this out. Take the time to really plan this out, because if you plan things out, you're more likely to get a lot of people on board, and you're more than likely going to be able to stay on track, and you can really gauge how long your project's actually going to take, versus just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and just kind of like, oh, well, I'll just wing it. Because winging it will not get your project completed, it will not get support, and your project will probably ultimately fail. You'll probably fall into that 90% of category, where about 90% of indie video games fail. And out of that 90%, I believe like 70% of them fail to even get off the ground. Like they don't even get graphics or programming initially within their first few months. Because whoever is leading the project failed to actually design the project before they started it. So make sure you design your project and schedule tasks and assign tasks. Next part, set an end date. Now this end date is probably going to change 100,000 times, but the fact of the matter is that you actually set one, and that's a goal. And your end date doesn't necessarily have to just be for the project's end date. It could actually be for the phases or maybe a task. So that's something to think about. So once you've hit that end date, so let's say that you've set an end date for phase 1 and that ends, well, what's your next step? You would obviously say logically phase 2, but maybe what if that's not the case? What if something comes up like during phase 1 that you learned that you have to do something else before you can even start doing phase 2? So that's kind of a reactive step, but these are things that you need to think about so you can go back and adjust your plan as needed. And your plan should always be available to all your team members. The next thing is marketing. Believe it or not, a really big part about making games is the business aspect of it. Is probably the biggest part. It's probably the most overlooked. So one of the parts of making a video game that relates to the business side is marketing your game. So you don't have to have a completed game to start marketing your product. We live in a wonderful world of the internet where you can actually start doing pre-sales, pre-marketing before your game's out. You can release trailers, you can release teasers and things of that nature. Like it happened for Diablo 3 for like 10 years, and to the point where we just finally got sick of seeing it and nobody cared really when it initially released. Or at least I know I didn't care when it released. I was like, whatever. Have any of you guys ever experienced that with a video game, like where it's just been overly marketed in your face, and by the time it got to be released, you're just like, I don't care anymore.
Yeah, I know recently Final Fantasy 15, like that game's been in development for over 10 years as well.
Wow,
Yeah,
Matt.
I mean, Daikatana comes to mind, but obviously, I wasn't there. But
Yeah, I can't believe they're keeping like the Final Fantasy franchise is just going. Like I remember when I was a kid, it was like Final Fantasy 1
yeah,
on Nintendo. I thought that was like I thought that was gonna be it, and then they came out with Final Fantasy 2, and it just kept going on and on and on. And I was like, man, is this game ever gonna end? Hence the name Final Fantasy, but yet it's still going. Good game, by the way. Anyway, so on your marketing, your product though, you want to have a good marketing concept. If you're not familiar with marketing or how marketing works, take the time before you start building your game to go out and research marketing or the marketing process. And if you don't have time to learn how to market your product, go hire somebody to market your product. Go find a contractor, go find somebody who's knowledgeable in the area of marketing and kind of pick their brain. It's a really simple thing. Marketing is a make or break type thing. Like, because if you don't have anybody to buy your product, then how are you going to fund your product? So, anyway, marketing concept. Come up with some concepts. Like, what do I want to do? Like, how do I want to market this product? What's my marketing plan details? What am I doing? Like, who's my target? Am I targeting, you know, younger generation? Am I targeting older people? Am I targeting, like, people between 20 and 30, 40 and 50? Am I targeting, what's my demographics? Am I targeting minorities? Am I targeting, you know, who's your target market? So those are some things that you want to think about. Next thing, marketing art. Everybody's going to need logos, pictures, and whatnot for your products. Oh yeah, and to kind of backtrack on what I said about minorities, not to sound like racist or anything, because I'm not. What I meant by that was, so let's say that I'm in Japan, for example. So if I live in Japan, but let's say that I want to sell my product in America, for example, well, I need to know my audience. So if I'm wanting to specifically though just target maybe Asian Americans in America, I probably need to research, you know, what is trending right now in the market, like what's going on, like just basically gather information. Or let's say that you're an African American and you want to make a product that's appealing to other African Americans. Things like that. Know your audience. Take the time to research, see what's working already out there in the industry, and then kind of base your marketing plan based on that. Other things, marketing art, for example, your images, for example. I can tell you right now, sex always sells. So if you have a marketing image that's very sexy or very provocative, whether it be a man or a woman, it doesn't matter. Sex sells. It catches your eye, it catches your attention. Things like that are designed to catch your eye. So you'll actually look at the product. It doesn't matter if you buy the product, you looked at it. It's like Coca-Cola and McDonald's. They consistently advertise. It's not that you'll actually go to McDonald's, it's just that you'll remember McDonald's or you'll remember Coca-Cola. So when you're out and you're shopping and maybe you're thirsty or you're hungry, you'll drive by McDonald's. You're like, maybe I'll pull over and get some McDonald's. Or if you're in the store shopping and you're kind of thirsty, you're like, maybe I'll buy a Coke. Because they've already marketed the product to you. They've branded that product to you. So that comes with a part of being creative in your images and how you distribute your images. Again, coming back to demographics, I think I went over that already. But target your audience. Understand the demographics. So if you're wanting to target baby boomers, for example, I don't know of honestly any baby boomers who would be playing a video game, But just for example, if that's who you're trying to target, I don't think a baby boomer would have any interest in playing Mortal Kombat.
Yeah,
Probably
the,
Bejeweled.
yeah, it's surprising how many older people like to play puzzle games.
Yeah, exactly. So like that's another thing. Like when you're creating your game, know your market. So I know a lot of old people love like the puzzle games, like you were saying, Jarrett. Like that's a really common thing. So before you even start building your game, you want to make sure that there's an actual market for your product. You know, that's a very overlooked thing. Like I don't know how many people have brought game ideas to me, like specifically for like rev share games, which is all the rage, of course, in any market. And they have a really cool idea to an extent, but then they like want to market to like people who have zero interest in that product. Like so you wouldn't try to market a game to homeless people, okay? In Europe. How are they going to play your game? They're homeless. They don't have electricity. I know that's kind of like an extreme example, but come on, seriously. Anyway, so in your marketing campaigns, you also want to have an end date. So you want to have start date, end date, and then what are your next steps? So once your marketing campaign ends, or that particular marketing campaign ends, what's the next marketing campaign that you're going to work on? What did you learn from this marketing campaign? What's the lessons learned? What's the takeaways? How successful was it? How many people did you reach? What did you know, out of your target audience, what's the percentage that actually purchased your product? Or how many did you actually reach? How many contacts did you make? Did you expand your network? You know, Things like that are very important for marketing, for you to really pay attention to those things so you can improve upon your next marketing campaign. Google Analytics is very good at that, um, for creating, kind of figuring out who to market your product to. Amazon comes to mind too. Amazon is really good using algorithms based on your previous purchases to determine what they think or what they suggest that you should purchase next. Have you guys seen that, like when you're on Amazon?
Yeah.
So you know exactly what
Yeah,
I'm talking about.
the things I didn't even know that I wanted until I see it.
Yeah, let me make sure we're still recording. Okay. Yeah, so things that you didn't even know you wanted, like they posted up there, and you're like, oh, wow, that's cool. I think I'll buy that. Right? That's not a coincidence. That's marketing. And they're targeting you, which is fine because nobody seems to really have much of a problem with it because it's pretty accurate, honestly. Next thing, stepping out of the business world and into the development world, programming. You need to pick a language. So, depending on your platform, that language already may be determined for you. So, if you're doing iOS, you have the option of Objective C or Swift. I recommend Swift because that's the way the world, in the iOS world, and that's pretty much what all iOS developers are doing now. They're writing their games in Swift. It's an open source language, to my understanding, and it's better than Objective C. Why? I don't know. I'm not an iOS developer. Don't ask me. This is what the guys at work tell me. Personally, I'm a fan of Xamarin. So if you're not familiar with Xamarin, Xamarin allows you to write it in C sharp, write your application in C sharp, and then it outports or it spits it out into Objective C and Java for Android. So you write it in one language and you can deploy to two separate platforms. So that's why I like Xamarin. Um, Xamarin's still relatively new though, so it could be tricky for you if you're a new developer to pick up a new programming language. So that's really your call. If you're doing Android development, Android Studio is really good. So I hear. Never used it. Again, I don't do mobile development. That's something new for me that I'm going to work into in probably the next 6 months. So those are some options for you: desktop development or Windows development in general, or just programming in general. Um, the number one programming language, probably though, for video games rather, is C++. Um, Very rare will you find a C++ developer, so good luck to you if you do find one, because those are the cream of the crop of the development world. So your most likely bet to finding a good developer who's decent is going to be somebody who's a C Sharp developer like myself, or maybe even Visual Basic, which again I know VB as well. Those are really common languages. Some other things that you might see is Ruby. I'm not a fan of Ruby. I don't recommend Ruby, but a lot of people like Ruby. Whatever, it's their flavor. Go for it. But again, pick a programming language. Next, pick a class structure. Um, Obviously, your programming language is going to determine how you structure your classes. Um, I guess a little bit more in depth though on that though would be work with your programmer to create some development standards and how you're going to write your code so that way it's more uniformed across the board. Um, it's really important that you get into the process or the flow of uniforming your code. Matt, would you agree?
Yeah,
I mean, you're our developer, so
yeah.
I mean, are standards important? I would assume you would not disagree with that.
Well, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, having standards really will save you a lot of headache in the long run. Specifically, having standards really helps with reducing bugs, as well as keeping your code clean and tight. Function structure is the same concept as I'm just basically saying uniform your code at the end of the day. If you're doing a database, your table structure, you need to have standards as well, um, for your table structure. I recommend using stored procedures. So one of the things that you can do here in the language section and in the database section, so you can kind of map out your classes or your class names and your function names here, or briefly what their names will be and what they want to do. If you're a developer, you'll know these things. If you're not a developer, you might want to ask your developer. Same thing for database. If you're not familiar with database structure, table structures, working with databases, get with your DBA, or just simply learn it yourself, or have your developer figure it out. Uh, but really, you need to map that out. Specifically, stored procedures are probably the most important thing that you need to map out ahead of time, so you kind of know what you're building. All of this is basically building the skeleton of your game. That's critical from a developer's perspective. Moving on to some of the other stuff that's, again, supporting the structure of your game. Every game that I've ever played has music. Matt, have you ever played any games that don't have music?
Well, I mean, yeah, but they're not good.
Jarrett, silence fills the room. I don't think has anybody played any games without music that were good.
I mean, I've made games without music.
Well, yeah, we've all made games without music, but those were more or less just like test games where we're like testing stuff and tutorials and stuff. But I mean, I'm talking about a real game that like you're gonna sell. Yeah, nobody.
Not,
What's that?
not really.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah, so help me out here on this, Matt, though, because you're the expert when it comes to music. So style. What are some styles of music you could have, Matt?
Um, I don't know, like chiptune, orchestral. Uh,
what is chip tune? Help me out here. What is chip tune? What is
uh,
castrol?
or just 8-bit.
8-bit?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I got you. Okay. So yeah, like 8-bit sound effects and stuff. Okay, that's cool. Um, so you want to describe your sound, of course. So let's say I'm coming to you, Matt, and I want a sound effect. I assume that you're going to need a description of that sound, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, obviously. So, like, if I want a machine gun, whatever, Same goes for background music. Describe the music the best you can. I don't think anybody's going to expect anybody to be, like, perfect in describing your sounds. But you should at least have a general idea of some of the music and sound effects that you're going to need for your game. Moving on to Jarrett's area of expertise, into the art area. So let's focus on items here just for a second because everybody has an idea of items. So in this section, you should really define like the item style, like or the art style of the items. So like if you're gonna go with like a pixelated game, or if you're gonna go with like help me out here, Jarrett. What are some art styles for? So like transparent. What else would there be? Matt, Jarrett.
Um, I don't know, like cartoony,
Yeah,
pixel,
cartoony.
stuff like that.
Yeah. So whatever your art style is, realism, whatever, semi-realism, whatever. Make sure you describe that, and then your item. What I would recommend when you're building or planning out your game, you try to list as many items as you can, and then give them a description of what it looks like, the attributes of each item, and the purpose of the item. Whether it's a quest item, whether it's just a generic drop item. If like let's say that it's like a crafted item, so you might want to put like the durability. If it's a weapon, how much damage it does. If it's a ranged weapon, things like that. Really go in depth on your items. Background styles, like your scenes. So if you're doing like a turn-based game, um, what scenes? If you're doing a platformer, what's level one look like? What's the style? Like, are you in the woods? Are you in a forest? Are you in a rocky area? Are you in a mountain? Are you in a sand land? Really describe the scene. Set the scene for each level or area, territory, whatever you want to call it. Describe your areas. I think we're getting close to the end here, aren't we? Wishful thinking. Um, Storyline. So, who are your main characters? What's their name? What's their backstory? What's their personality, their appearance, their height, their weight, their mood, their strengths, their weaknesses? Really get involved in your storyline and your character. Write out your generic storyline here and then maybe describe the characters or your backstory for your characters or maybe for your game or whatever it is. Like, you're here again, characters, either the enemies, just kind of the same thing, their attributes, the level design again, going into the story itself, like describe the story, describe the levels, describe the enemies, the objectives, give a good description of that level or that territory or that area. What is the objective of that area? What enemies live in that area? Next, coming to your spells. What's the name of your spell? Describe your spell. Like, what's the effects? What's its damage? What's the objectives? So if it's like a poison spell, how much poison does it do over time? If it's a lightning spell, what does it, on top of damaging the player, does it like daze them? Does it stun them? Does it do, what does it do? Really describe that in depth. Again, coming back to items, give a name and a description. Just kind of briefly describe your items. Quest systems or crafting systems. What are some recipes that you have? Oh yeah, coming back to items, like just some general guidelines here you could probably add on to it though, like the damage, the quest item. Is it craftable? Is it a recipe? What's the attributes? Is it legendary? Stuff like that. So yeah, I mean you get it. And then the final thing is your crafting system. Um, good games have really good crafting systems. Would anybody disagree with that? I mean, Minecraft, for example, has a really unique craft system. I really like it. It's really cool. Matt, what's your favorite craft system?
Um, yeah, probably Minecraft.
Jarrett? Anybody else? Let's see if anybody typed anything. Ben? Nothing? No, Ben's typing. Let's see what he says. I don't know if you guys are being picked up on your audio too, by the way. So if I repeat what you're saying, it's just because I don't know if your audio is being picked up.
Uh,
I don't think Minecraft's the same, Ben. I mean, I understand what you're saying, but with Minecraft, something that Minecraft did differently, I think, than any other game with its crafting system, is it had the 9 blocks and you had to place your items specifically in specific blocks when you're crafting your item. All the other crafting systems that I've ever worked with, you basically just had to have the materials in your on hand, and you just click the button. So Minecraft, you had to put them inside the box. Yeah, Minecraft's different. Exactly, that's what I was getting at, Ben. Like Minecraft was a really cool, unique crafting system concept. You know, honestly, Quad, I don't think I've ever seen Forsaken. I've never played Forsaken. I've heard a lot about it, but I've never played it. Um, so you'd have to describe the crafting system to me, because I simply
It's
just don't
the
know.
best. It's literally the best.
Well, why is it the best? Like, how does it
Because
work?
all right, so you have locked recipes or whatever, and then as you get the materials, the recipes that you can craft, kind of like Terraria, except for Terraria has like everything. You can see everything at once, but I can't really explain it. I'm gonna have to like show
I get what you're
more.
saying.
But
So the
it's
recipes are locked, and you have to unlock them.
yeah, and
Is it
it's
like you have to like go on quests to find them and unlock them?
no. You actually have to find the resources, and once you have all the resources, it'll say if I had flint and stone and sticks, it'll pop up and show that I can make a campfire and I can make these tools or whatever and all the things that lay out with just those materials that you have.
Okay, I
It's
get it. So you have to have the items on hand before it'll
yeah,
actually show the recipes.
yeah.
Okay, I
But
get it.
once you actually craft something, of course, it goes into your recipe book as you've unlocked it. So
I see. Okay, I that makes sense. Yeah, so there you go. There's a craft system concept right there. But anyway, yeah, coming back to the guide here. Yeah, I mean, list your recipe names and then what items are needed for your recipes, the tools, the durability for the tools, if you're even going to have a durability system, the skill and class system. I tell you, my favorite game was Ultima Online, and it used a skill system instead of a class system or a level system. So a lot of games now I know are like class driven and level driven, but Ultima Online was skill driven. You had X amount of points. I think it was like 700 points that you could spend on your skills. Um, some people were crafters, some people were like PvPers, some people were mages. You know, it just gave you a really good balance on your, for the world, and that was how that worked. Like you had a range and your skill, like you had to be a certain skill to unlock certain recipes. So that was like one of my favorites. But anyway, that's one concept. It's another concept for craft system. And then another thing that you have to think about when you're designing your craft system is what's your rate of failure, what's your rate of success. Do you want to have like an exceptional type system, like where you can craft like an exceptional item? And your crafting system should probably tie into your merchant system as well. I know I didn't list that on here when you're designing your game, but you probably want to expand upon this as well on your own, and maybe add a section in this outline for like your merchant system. Um, Other things that are not on here, like chat systems that you could add to your game. Um, what else, guys? I mean, feel free to throw out some ideas here of some things that are not in this outline that you could have probably just about any game. Like, what are some things that you would want to map out in your outline?
Um,
Nobody?
I don't know, maybe like game modes.
Game modes? Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good idea. Like, I was going to do that with Ant Farms. So, like, where you had, like, zombie mode, you had, like, dinosaur mode. So, like, when you're fighting the monsters, it would only generate like zombies or it would only generate like dinosaurs. So yeah, that's a good idea. Like so you could have like a mode system like or yeah, or even like easy, hard for your difficulty. Is that what you're referring to as well?
Oh yeah, but I just meant like yeah, like a sandbox mode, like just stuff like that, like alternate stuff that
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could.
sandbox mode would be good too. Yeah, that's good stuff. Quad?
Oh, I'm completely since I came kind of late. I didn't even realize there was a call, so
Nah,
I'm
it's
just
cool, man.
yeah, I'm just spinning. I was texting on the side, but yeah, I just came into the realization that there was an actual call. Yeah, so right now I'm kind of multitasking. I'm working on my game and discussing with y'all as well. So
Oh, that's cool, man. Jarrett, I know you're working on art. What do you think though? Like anything that we missed here?
No, I think you got it all.
Who else? Ben? Got anything you want to add, Ben? Like maybe that like might be useful to every people like when you're designing a game. I know you have to type unfortunately because your mic. No. Okay. All right. I think that's pretty much it, guys. I think that's yeah. I think that's pretty good. Did everybody get a copy of the document?
yeah,
Yeah.
can you explain it just a little bit more? Like so,
So which
um,
which section?
like just no, just the purpose. Like so, whenever we make a game, we like fill it out with this like document or whatever. Or it's just
Yeah. So the document is just like a general guideline. So like when you're making your video game
hmm
or you're designing your game rather, it's more or less just kind of like a general guideline where you can go in here and fill in the blank, quote unquote. This offers like suggestions, for your design, and you just kind of fill it in, you know, uh, with everything you can think of, at that point. So when you go to present it to like an investor, for example, um, you'll already have your game's concept documented. So you can present that to him or her and determine how much, they can determine how much they want to invest in your product. Or if you're out, you're recruiting for people, you have something to show them already, like, hey, here's my concept of my game or my product. This is what I'm trying to make, you know. Or you can even just simply use it for yourself to kind of keep yourself on track if you're doing it all by yourself. It kind of acts as kind of like a guideline for yourself to like, okay, this is where I'm at currently in my project. And
okay.
this, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So that's really the whole point of documenting your project, and it doesn't apply just to video games. Um, if you think about this, this pretty much applies to anything and everything that we do in our professional careers.
hmm
Somebody is managing the project, somebody is planning out things. There's a plan somewhere in place, whether we see it or not. Somebody has something planned, and we're just following through with their plan, unless you're the manager writing the plan. But ultimately, you're just, probably just following a plan that somebody else already wrote. So that's pretty much the whole concept here. Thanks, guys, for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. 1 second.